All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here for our January-February 2023 FCI Live series. This is our second session. It was our first day. We're kicking it off, and we have a great topic for you tonight. We will be talking with Patrice Lockhart-Anthony, who is the principal of Black Label Consulting and Coaching. And the topic tonight is the leadership team, building your co-op systems. And this emerged as a topic from Patrice's work with startup food co-ops, who has been working with some startup food co-ops and learning a lot about the process in balance with her long and lengthy experience actually being in governance and being a board president for food cooperatives, and her deep, steep knowledge in that, pairing with what she's been learning about startups, working with startups. And so something really fruitful came from that. And she has a presentation for us tonight that we are really looking forward to. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to ask everyone one more time again to make sure you are muted. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Patrice. Thank you for being here, Patrice.
Thank you, JQ. Hey, everybody, how are you?
Peace. Oh, did I say something?
But you know what? You can your hand.
Oh, yeah.
Great, thank you for asking.
So I go to my sort of low-key voice and lecture style in order to do this, but I'm feeling a little wonky today. So I'm going to go back and forth between that person and my political self. So let's just see how this goes, all right? Let's just see how this goes. I am really, really insistent on understanding and knowing systems that help the leadership teams everywhere, but particularly co-ops and not-for-profits. Because in co-ops, for instance, there is the need for an understanding of democracy, right? It's a democratic process, a democratic organization. And it's also one of the things that makes it most complex. I think co-ops are the most complex systems of all of the businesses that are out there, because we claim to be democratic, we want to be democratic, but it is hella hard to let everybody have their voice, to let everybody freely express themselves, and one, not lose your mind, and two, get anything done. And partly that's because we don't really understand what the democratic process is. We're using a process that is American, that has been misused and abused, and that back where they took it from, the Greeks, the Greeks had been traveling elsewhere and brought their idea of democratos back to Greece. And then they bastardized it, and then we bastardized it some more, okay? So there's some work ahead of us. Systems are important on the governing side and on the operation side. Systems are important throughout cooperative organizations because you need to create a dynamic flow. You need to create the dynamic flow. First slide, please. Actually, second. Okay, let me get rid of that. There we go. And there. Your goal is your desired outcome. Your system is the collection of daily habits that will get you there. This year, spend less time focusing on outcomes and more time focusing on the habits that precede the results. That's by James Clear, who is the author of Atomic Habits. This, first of all, changed my life. When he's talking about systems over goals, people are always setting goals. People went into January 1st talking about all kinds of goals and resolutions, and by January 2nd, they were making excuses about how that wasn't going to happen and why. Goals are great, but they are not the important piece if you want to create something that is successful and sustainable. You want to build, create and build a system based on habits that work for you. And that includes the organization. You want a dynamic flow that is integrating and intersecting with all of the various components that make up your organization. Some people talk about, for instance, the separation between governance, the board, and operations, the GM. And in many co-ops, the GM is sort of set apart from the staff, and everyone ends up set apart from the membership and the community. That's not a good thing. Not when you're talking about a co-op and why the co-op exists in the first place. It's not a good thing at all. So what we want to talk about here are the right systems for your co-op that will create a dynamic flow that integrates and intersects between the board, operations, membership, and the community. That will begin with you knowing, understanding, openly acknowledging, and working systemically toward vision, mission, and purpose. Next slide, please. Okay. So the right systems for your co-ops will create a dynamic flow that integrates and intersects between board, operations, membership, and community. They will serve the evolution and sustainability of your co-ops. It begins with co-op identity, and identity will give you vision, mission, and purpose. And let's talk about the evolution and the necessity of that evolution. You need, and this is also why systems are more important than goals here. Goals are what an old college friend of mine who was a recovering alcoholic, and he called it future tripping. When you focus on something that's out there, planning for that is fine. Knowing that you want to get there, that's fine too. But focusing on it, taking your energy and using it out there instead of here and now on the day-to-day activities that if you practice them, if you work them, will naturally get you out there to where you want to be. It's a mistake to focus on the goals. Instead, you want to build and create your systems that are based on your identity that will allow you to have habits that work within who and how you are as an organization, as a co-op. And in order to do that, all those separate parts, board, GM, staff, members, community, you all need to work together. It needs to be a dynamic flow, and that means you're building relationships. You're building trust. You're getting to know each other, how each separate piece of that works, what it takes, and what the ebb and flow is between the board and the GM and the staff and how they work with members. And if your co-op is open to non-members, how are you presenting yourself? How are you working together? And how do all those separate pieces flow back and forth into each other? Now I'm checking in for a second. You guys understand where I'm going so far? Actually, I can't see you right now, so I don't know what you're saying. There we go. Thank you.
We got some yeses in the chat. Yep.
Yes.
Bunch of them.
Okay. Now, let's try this. I'm going to separate this into 4 different pieces. The first is to encourage you to use FCI's website that has resources on it for getting yourselves organized to get this plan off the ground, this idea. It's really an idea, isn't it? An idea, a concept that you want to make real. And in order to do it, you have to know who you are, how you are, and then create the habits that become the system that you work until you achieve your desired outcomes, right? The FBI, so sorry, JQ. The FCI website, those resources on systems for organizing your effort. Systems thinking, and then we're going to go to systems thinking for deliberating on processes and building your operational and governing systems. And I'm weaving throughout this the James Clear model for creating systemic habits that, when lived and worked, move you naturally and authentically toward your desired outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, these are cognitive biases that get in the way of creating and working a system. Now, I've incorporated these into this presentation because in my consulting and coaching practice, one of the things I always end up saying to clients is, I really need you to get out of your own way. As we think about all these other things that are in our way and that are impeding progress, but too often we are in our own way. So cognitive biases that get in our way and how we're processing, how we're seeing things. The mere urgency effect is our tendency to prioritize urgent tasks over important tasks. This has us getting stuck in a reactive mindset 24/7. Why is that important to a beginning, to a startup co-op? Oh my God. Because as long as you are in emergency mode, and too often that happens, do we have enough members? Are people signing up fast enough? What about the money? Where are we going to start it? That's all future tripping. It is all future tripping. And it's not that you don't want to look at those things sometimes, but you don't want to terrify yourself into freezing and not being able to get your work done. You don't want to be in a reactive mindset 24/7. You want to know what the difference is between important tasks and urgent tasks. Urgent tasks are emerging things that have happened that need to be taken care of right away. If you're doing that 24/7, you're off task because everything isn't urgent like that. You need to decide what is important and then block time out to take care of those things. Deliberately blocking time out to take care of those things. That means conversations between you and the other founding members of the co-op. That means taking time out to incorporate. It means taking time out to build those bylaws, because I got to tell you, I've seen some pretty silly bylaws that have been there from the beginning, and 30 years later, they're still there. And I'm like, what is this? Oh, well, we used to. Do you still know? Then why is it there? Take care of your stuff. Plan for blocks of time to take care of your business, which leads us to the next one, the planning fallacy. Our tendency to underestimate the time, cost, or effort required to complete a task. I haven't worked with a single organization, including my own, that haven't done this. Don't do this. Give yourself enough time. In fact, give yourself a buffer. So if you think it's going to take you 3 days to get something done, deliberately build in a couple of extra days. Deliberately, if you finish early, great. But if you end up needing more time, Jacqueline, did you just? Oh, yeah.
I couldn't keep down the amen. Sorry.
Here's the thing. Let's say you have some new members and they're really excited about getting going and they're ready to start shopping and they're talking about it and then they, 6 months goes by, 9 months goes by, a year goes by, a year and a half goes by, 3 years goes by. And they're starting to get a little touchy because there's no storefront. There's still no co-op for them to shop in, hang out in. You're the leadership. Address that from the beginning, and you should probably have a newsletter, something like that, create a blog, have something where routinely, that's like a passage that's standard on the first page of your website. It is an ongoing process. It takes time. You're building funds. You're taking care of paperwork. You're having marketing studies done. This is not an overnight process. And by overnight, I mean that if you are a startup co-op, understand that you could be starting this process today, and you may not open up a store for 3 years, 5 years, sometimes it's 10 years out. Plan accordingly. And don't underestimate the amount of time. And don't tell your people you're going to be open in a year. Because I'm certain that when you tell them that, it's because you're trying to please them and not because you've actually done the background work on what needs to be done before you open up. Because I know if you had done that, you wouldn't be telling them you were going to be ready in a year. Okay? Give yourself what you need to succeed and sustain. If cost is an issue, take the time to research options that mitigate the cost, or take the time necessary to raise needed funds. Be creative, be ingenious, be hardworking, do the research, but take the time necessary. Next, negativity bias. Our tendency to be more affected by negative experiences than positive ones, impacting how we think, feel, and even how we perceive others. I'm going to tell you that most of my emphasis on this is in the last 6 words. 7, and even how we perceive others. All you have to do is look around you today at news shows, social media, even some of the more popular novels that are coming out today. They focus on the negative stuff, the ugly stuff, because the science is in. Your psychology, almost no matter who you are, will pay attention to the negative stuff that comes in rather than focusing on the positive. That's why it is often said that for every negative thing that is said to you, it takes around 5 to 10 positive things to knock that negativity out of you. So don't do that to yourself. Know the first weapon against this is to know that it happens. And then you fight it, because this could literally kill you. Stop focusing on the negative stuff. You hear something negative, okay. Now take a breath and go read or talk to somebody about something positive. Focus on what you are getting done, not only what hasn't gotten done. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the part where we're talking about systems thinking. And I'm sorry, I meant to mention all those things that we just talked about. You can talk with JQ. You can go on the FCI website. They have an entire book on all of this, getting you started. And then they also have other helpful tools on there. Please, please, please make use of what FCI offers digitally. And then talk about it with all of your people. Now, the systems thinking piece. Organizing. Systems thinking is a way of making sense of the complexity of the world by looking at it in terms of wholes and relationships. Think holistic, rather than by splitting it down into its parts. It has been used as a way of exploring and developing effective action in complex contexts, thus enabling systems change. I'm going to try not to go overboard on these pieces, but I gotta tell you, cooperatives are not meant to be like other businesses. They were created for a reason. They are different for a reason. They talk about economic empowerment and democracy for everyone, one person, one voice, one vote, for a reason. And even before the term cooperative came into being, humans and animals have been cooperating since we were created. Because that's what you do when you need to survive, when you need to sustain, and when you want to succeed, you cooperate. We are different politically, economically, and we should be different culturally, and yet we far too frequently depend upon the resources, the thinking of the ways that got us to the point where we needed to think differently. More on that towards the end. Process. Systems thinking is the process of understanding how various systems influence one another within a larger system. Systems exist everywhere you look. In nature, for example, air, water, plants, and animals work together. In organizations, systems include people, planning, processes, and performance. You got that? We naturally work together. We naturally work together. It's not that competition and ego don't also naturally exist. It's just that we've gotten to the point where we put so much emphasis on ego and greed that we forget that the other also is a natural process. That's why every time there's some disaster, folks are all coming together. They're just resorting to what has always been. Next slide, please. Importance of systems thinking. Systems thinking offers a way to better predict future outcomes based not on past events, but on a more intimate understanding of the surrounding structure and its elements. Quote, structure to a large extent determines behavior, end quote, by Daniel Kim. This, for cooperatives, is so important, but especially startup co-ops, because what you create as your foundation to build on, to evolve from, to grow into, that's where you want to be. But if you don't understand that structure to a large extent determines behavior, let me give you an example through my work at Black Label. I'm an anti-racist. That's me as the noun. I do anti-racist work. That's me, the verb. But why? Because in America, we have a whole host of systems that exist from the very beginning that created structures that determined behavior. And the longer the systems exist, the more inculcated behavior becomes to those systems. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? You can just write yes or no or explain, please.
So are you saying that it's separate? Excuse me, my name is Demetrius Carter.
Hi.
I represent several organizations. I don't want to get into that, but I'm a community leader at heart. I'm trying to figure out exactly, like, are you saying, like, you have stated that racism isn't, like, you're against racism, and then I was like kind of confused, like, a little bit. Like, I need some clarification there.
You need clarification on what it is to
No,
be.
I know what it means for you to be against racism, but then you started saying some things afterwards, like it was like, using it as a verb or something along those lines.
Well,
like, I'm trying.
Okay, I got you. JQ, in this case, it was all right because I actually asked them. My bad. Also my good, because I'm glad to know that you need further explanation. That helps. I don't want you guys confused or not understanding what I'm saying. There are people who say they're not racist. That's noun-ish. It's passive. It's not doing the work. Being anti-racist is actively advocating for a state of being, for justice. It is actively advocating for systems change, which is what cooperatives were designed to do. Actively advocate for systems change so that the rich and powerful didn't get to keep co-opting money, materials, land, processes. The idea behind cooperatives was to empower the people who were not landed lords and ladies and rich folks who try to get us to invest, for instance, in the stock market, even though that doesn't help us. The stock market helps rich people. So the importance of systems thinking is that you can predict future outcomes and build and change and renew systems that will shift paradigms And too often, co-ops these days, and for a long time now, have focused primarily on capitalism rather than the very reasons for creating the co-ops in the first place. So just send me some yeses and some nos if you get what I'm saying.
Now I'm 100% tracking. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Next slide, please. This is the last slide before my card with my information. I want to read this to you guys. Some of you, I don't know you, so some of you may be uncomfortable by some of what the author is saying. It's important to listen to both specifically and generally, specifically for what Audre Lorde is actually saying on the topic that she's speaking on, but also generally in terms of cooperation, in terms of where you are as beginning co-ops, where you want to be, how you're going to get there, practicing the mindfulness that will get you there, being willing to see through a different lens, being willing to see from a new perspective, being willing to explore and discover the richness of the human fabric in your communities, in your membership, in your governing bodies, in your staff. It's where the quote, "the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house," comes from, Audre Lorde. Quote, "It is a particularly academic arrogance to assume any discussion of feminist theory without examining our many differences and without a significant input from poor women, Black women, and third world women and lesbians. And yet, I stand here as a Black lesbian feminist, having been invited to comment within the only panel at this conference where the input of Black feminists and lesbians is represented. What this says about the vision of this conference is sad. In a country where racism, sexism, and homophobia are inseparable. To read this program is to assume that lesbian and Black women have nothing to say about existentialism, the erotic, women's culture and silence, developing feminist theory, or heterosexuality and power. What does it mean when the tools of the racist patriarchy are used to examine fruits of that same patriarchy? It means that only the most narrow parameters of change are possible and allowable," end quote. I have been at conferences where, for instance, boards of higher organizations have talked about needing to do work on diversity and inclusion and equity. And they do this while they're sitting there together and they're making these announcements, and everyone there on the board is white, male, and older. I have nothing against older white males, except for when they really don't get it. And that's a case of not getting it. I have been on boards where I'm talking about ways to encourage and increase difference on the board, not just more Black people, people who are differently abled, people with all manner of sexual identity, gender differences, just people who process differently, people who come from varying cultures, family backgrounds, and then been told, well, we have some really important stuff that we need to get done right now. We can come back to that. As if to say that there's nothing that any of those people would have been able to add to that conversation or contribute to resolving issues, to getting tasks done. We so undermine ourselves when we continue to think like and use as a tool, as a referential paradigm, what has always been. Because what has always been really has not served us well. So when you're starting these co-ops, when you start to think about what's necessary in terms of organizing, in terms of questions that need to be asked, even marketing surveys, do you guys realize that for Black communities, because most marketing surveyors are white, that they don't even know what questions to ask. The questions are different, by the way. They are very different. You can't take a marketing survey that is designed for white communities and expect it to serve in Black communities. There are different thought processes at work. There are different experiences at work, different cultural understandings at work, different priorities at work. You see what I'm saying? So, and I want to add this because I keep getting this from white co-opers and farmers and ranchers who live in predominantly or all white areas. Well, what am I supposed to do? We don't have people of color in our neighborhood, in our area, in our community. I'll tell you where to start. Ask yourself why that is, and go from there with honesty. Okay, next slide. And this is my thank you. And next slide, this is information if you guys need it. And then we're gonna go, let's go to discussion. And I'm going to, can you put me, there we are. Hi, everybody. I couldn't see your faces while I was trying to keep up with my notes. Okay, lay it on me. What you wanna ask or talk about?
Do you want everyone to throw things in the chat to start and we'll sort through and decide who to unmute at that point?
Yeah, throw things in the chat.
Okay. Well, I'll warm everyone up by saying, wow, when Patrice suggested this is their topic, I said, well, you know, there's the 4 cornerstones of startup food co-op organizing, and the one we never talk about is systems. And, you know, we're like, oh yeah, you have to have a system for tracking your owners. You have to have a system, but, you know, we don't spend a lot of time there. And I was like, well, this will be great. You know, we can explore systems. Yes, that's great, Patrice. And then the first thing you said was basically, even for startup food co-ops who form basically on the premise of delivering something very specific to people that have to raise money, that have to find owners, that have to try and get through the steps, and people are putting so much pressure on them to get it done in 3 years, not 7 years. And you're said, and if you're not looking at the systems and culture you're building and working on that ahead of those goals, that you're not building your co-op right. I don't know for anyone else if that was a little bit of a mind explosion, but it was for me. That was a little bit, and it speaks to so many problems we see in early startup organizing. So that was just a mind explosion. Thank you for that, Patrice.
My pleasure. I do try.
Did anyone else feel some resistance when you heard think about your systems and your culture and work on and focus on that above those individual number goals of owners, above raising the money. Did anyone else feel a little like heart attack when they heard that? I invite you guys to throw things in the chat, or if there's someone like wants to unmute, you can raise your hand too.
Yeah, you can unmute now.
Yeah.
We just have to respect each other's space.
Sean.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this, because it's almost like a confirmation on what we've been trying to focus on is really connect with our community outside of our own domain, because we have a lot of our majority of our community now is more Hispanic than it is Black. And or didn't, you know, and so we're focusing on a couple of things on how do we connect with the different organizations that serve the part of the community that we're not connected to, you know. So this was awesome, the things that you were saying, the who, the how, and where our systems, when you said that, and making sure that we know they know who we are and how we want to bring them in. That is one of the things that stuck out with me. And then when you talk about the bylaws, we're doing our meeting tomorrow, and we're going to be going through the bylaws line by line. And what stuck out with me when you talked about the bylaws is how, yeah, you started them at the very beginning, and then they're irrelevant. Part of it could be irrelevant later on. So how often should we look at them? How often should we update them? And is it an ongoing process? You know what I mean? So is it something that we would look at each time we hit a milestone, or each time we're in a different phase, or when do we look at it, and when do we update them or amend them?
I always recommend an annual look at policy unless something happens to shake it up, like your membership is up in arms about something, or they want something that the board is advocating against. And you have board members who are, you suddenly hear board members saying things that, if put into effect, disenfranchise or disempower the membership. That's a no-no.
Okay, wait.
That's a no-no.
You got to explain that.
Okay, I can give you an example from a co-op that I was a member of and on the board of. We had a very, very active membership, college town. So a lot of, you know, PhDs and people who were certain that they understood what was and what wasn't, right? The problem was we also had board members who thought that way. And there was a particular, what were we doing? I think it was the China boycott. This was years ago. So forgive me if I don't have all of the details at the tip of my mind. But in any case, they wanted us to boycott all Chinese foods that were in the store. Not purchase them anymore, not let people buy them anymore, blah, 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 blah. And I was cracking up because I wasn't on the board when it first happened. And so they actually acceded to this group's demands and put the boycott in place. And I was on the board, and when it came back to the table, and I went, excuse me, did anybody do the research to find out if you could legally do that? And everyone just sort of looked at each other. And I went, did anybody check to see? And it turns out that they had not. And in New York State, you could not do that. So the co-op had essentially been breaking the law for about 2 years. And no, that's why I'm also big on asking questions. You know, there was another case where we had community members and co-op members who, like me, were really big on doing some of the DEIJ work. And we had some board members, 5, and a handful of store owners who were against that. And there were board members who were trying, not the 5, the rest of us, who wanted to encourage people who had a voice about it to speak up. And the 5 actually drew up policy that they wanted us to vote on that would silence the members. So you see what I mean? That America is supposed to be a representative democracy. We elect people based on what we know of them, trusting that they will go to their state capital or the federal government and represent what we have said are our needs. It is no different with board co-ops. And if the board members are not representing what the members in the community are saying they need, well, there's a problem. There's a problem. Does that help at all?
Yes, absolutely, because this
Okay.
is a conversation that we haven't heard yet. And we're in all these meetings with JQ.
Feel
So
free to
thank
get
you.
into feel free to get in touch with me, and JQ has access to me all the time. So
Okay,
she
thank you.
can,
Yes,
yeah, okay.
yes.
Anyone else?
You've got a comment in the chat. Do you want me to read it out?
Please.
I find it hard to transition from putting out fires to intentional planning. Our co-op is in that season of planning for the first time, but I still feel the tug as the project manager to focus on immediate community engagement instead of enterprise planning and governance planning.
I hear you. I hear you. You know the part where I said block time off? You do the same thing in a slightly different way. Instead of giving yourself a time buffer so that you have more time to do something, instead of doing that, you take, speaking of creating habits that become systems, you take the things that you know must be done on a daily basis, not urgent, not emergent, your daily tasks, they've got to get done daily. In the same way you do month to month, year to date, month to date sort of things, so that you can account for what you've been doing and what's been coming in. You're going to do the same thing in terms of your tasks, your focus, your attention. Okay. So you're going to figure out what you need to do daily, and you're going to map that out. And you're going to deliberately give yourself a block of time in the day to do those things. You're also going to have a list of important tasks that might not be daily, but you know that if you don't give attention to these things, they're going to create urgent matters. And you block out time for those. And it may be, I have things that I don't touch until Fridays. And the reason I don't touch them on Fridays is because they require full focus. And so on my Fridays, I don't schedule meetings. I don't schedule appointments. I have that block of time that day to deal with those things that require my entire focus. That's one of the ways that you do it. And I learned that through both James Clear from Atomic Habits and and now I can't think of his name. Bullet Journal, Bujo. Because I have ADHD and I could not do all of my community efforts, sit on my boards, which until 2 months ago, I was on 4 boards. I'm only on 2 now because I regained my sanity. So you can't do all of that and have ADHD if you don't create a system for making sure that everything has its place, has its time, and you can be creative about it. You can be creative about it. But you do it with intention, with deliberation, because you know that if you don't, you're costing yourself and you're costing the co-op. I hope that helps. If you want to talk more, just get in touch with me.
His name is Ryder Carroll.
I love those 2 authors. They have done so much to give shape to my life so that I can stop putting Post-it notes all over the damn place that always fall off and I lose them.
We got another question in the chat. Real quick before I go to that, this will be probably the last one we can take. Maybe we'll be able to squeeze in one more. 2 things. Patrice has offered generously. We're going to wrap up at the top of the hour, close down the video, turn off the recording. But Patrice has generously offered to stay and continue the conversation with anyone who wants to. So you'll have that option after you hear me close up the session. 2, if you want Patrice to have access to your email address to send some follow-up links that she would like to share, please drop your email in the chat, so she can list those names of those books and put those links to those resources so you can find them. We do not hand out your email when you register with us or to anyone without your permission. So we need you to actually put yours in the chat if you want to give us permission to share it with Patrice. And now the question was, when we talk about accessibility and people understanding the co-op landscape, how do we make the language and explanations accessible to people of all backgrounds?
Hot damn. So, one, just to be realistic, you may not be able to do that all in one place at the same time. 2, it requires patience, understanding, and research and work, because you have to figure out what language people are understanding. And being a writer myself and loving language, this kick I've been on lately, and I think the person who asked this question will understand, there are things that people say that just maybe they shouldn't oughta. There are things that get said through maliciousness. There are things that get said because of privilege. There are things that get said because you just really didn't understand. And there are people who get into the habit of saying things and then excusing themselves. Oh, I was just kidding, or that wasn't what I intended to do. Well, you know what they say about the road to hell. I'm just saying. What we intend has become this huge sort of excuse for people to just say whatever they want to. So if you have an idea of the group of people that you are communicating with or wanting to communicate with, to create a relationship with, the first thing I would suggest is that you go to them. Don't sit back waiting for them to come to you. Don't have an expectation of them coming to you. That's just rude and arrogant. Go to them. I grew up in a community that every summer had church tent meetings. And before the tent meetings would commence in July or August, they would spend weeks just going throughout the neighborhood, knocking on everybody's door and having conversations. They'd get invited in and they'd have all these conversations. They get to know each other. And sure enough, those tent meetings would just fill right up. There is much in that process that we no longer do that hurts us. Go out and get to know your people. And every time you make a great impression on them, they're going to tell somebody about that. In fact, they're going to rave about it. And you want that. If you have to have a blog, have a newsletter, and talk about all of those different ways of communicating over time, so that no one is left out, everyone is included, but you understand that it takes time to build that relationship, those relationships, and have everyone know that you're there for them. Hope that helps.
Patrice, I'm going to jump to our closing real quick, and then we'll continue the conversation with anyone who has time in just a moment. So I just wanted to pre-warn you.
Thank you.
So I want to thank Patrice for an amazing session and a whole new fresh perspective on so much of what we do. And she is with Black Label Consulting and Coaching. If you've put your email in the chat, she will be sending you out some links and some resources so you'll know how to connect with her. And I want to just make sure you know about the rest of the series coming up. This is only day one. We have so much amazing content happening the rest of this week and through next week. Here's what's coming up Tuesday and Wednesday, some really interesting conversations about leadership from all different angles, as well as dealing with the financial challenges of opening your co-op, because we do have to look at that, even though it's sometimes urgent, we want to focus on the systems. You know,
Yep.
we do, one of the systems is financial.
Yep.
So we have some great conversations coming up, and the financial challenges opening co-op day will really focus on some of the new trends we're seeing in how things are getting harder and easier in a few ways to fund startup food co-ops. So please do join us for that one. And I know transitional reporting dashboard doesn't sound super exciting, but if you're a co-op that has a GM or will soon be hiring a GM, this one is critical. A GM is going to show you how they can effectively report to you during the transition to the GM before the stores open. And this has never been done before. This is the first template we've ever seen for it. Please be there, be a part of it. And then building leadership from within. I'm so excited about this one. Lene Gilbert from Detroit People's Food Co-op and Arendelle McClellan, two amazing board chairs, are going to talk about how they do education and leadership and bringing people up from within in their membership to build new leadership in the co-op and to help people be more leaderful instead of ending up with just a lot of leaders who come from outside the community, which often happens to a lot of startups. So even with the best of intentions. Real quick, we have to thank our sponsors that made today possible. Thank you to the USDA, National Cooperative Banks, National Cooperative Grocers, and CoBank. Without their support, we wouldn't be here having this conversation today. Thanks everyone for being a part of this. And thank you again to Patrice.